So shall we start now?
Not yet, please. The people are still in the waiting room. We're just starting the recording.
2 minutes.
Okay. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Are you able to hear me?
Bonjour.
Yes, we can hear you. Good afternoon. Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, dear colleagues, distinguished invited guests, welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation to this afternoon's proceedings. This is co-organized by the Teacher Task Force for Education 2030, or TTF, and the International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, or IICBA. And we're here in this virtual regional capacity building workshop on teacher policy development in Africa. Among our participants, among others, we have some members of the TTF, organizing members, other national stakeholders, representatives of civil society, intergovernmental organization, and NGOs and others. So my name is Salio Sal, and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator of the IICBA, UNESCO-IICBA. So this afternoon, I'm going to be the co-moderator. And before getting into this session, allow me first of all just to issue a couple of housekeeping messages that hopefully will enable for a smooth flow of our proceedings this afternoon. So first of all, I'd just like to invite you to mute your microphone if you're not currently taking the floor. However, do please remember to activate both your camera and your microphone when you do take the floor. Next, today we have interpretation in English, in French, and in Arabic. You can choose the language that you wish by using the little globe icon on the bottom of your screen. Now, you can use the chat function to ask questions or make any comments. If you want to request the floor, then please use the hand raising function, or you could send us a message in the chat. And finally, we would like to kindly request that you speak clearly and slowly so that the interpreters will be able to correctly interpret what it is that you're saying. Now, there are going to be 3 different parts to today's workshop. Firstly, we're going to have the opening ceremony and introductions, which is currently what we're doing. The second phase is where we're going to have 3 parallel breakout groups, which are actually regional groups, one in English, one in French, and one in Arabic. And during that, we're going to be able to look at the teacher development policy guide published by UNESCO. And also, we're going to hear from your regional or national teacher policy experiences. And the third phase is when we're going to come back into plenary altogether, and we'll hear the feedback from all of those different breakout groups, and we'll be discussing things more in depth than here in this part, and then we'll move to the closing ceremony. So we're delighted to have among us here Dr. Yumiko Yokozeki, who's the director of IICBA, Mr. Carlos Vargas Tames, who is head of the TTF and head of UNESCO section of teacher development. Now, we will hopefully hear later on from Dr. Kumba Boliberi, Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education from the UNHCR, and hopefully we'll be able to hear her comments before the end of our session today. So first of all, I should like to hand over to Dr. Yumiko Yokozeki, Director of IICBA, for her presentation. Thank you. Over to you if you can hear me, Yumiko.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
We can.
Good. Thank you very much, Salu, for chairing this virtual capacity building workshop, and the speakers and moderators of all participants for joining the workshop. Thank you very much. It is so exciting to see so many old and new friends here. It is really my pleasure and honor to be with you here today for this important session. No one can deny the importance of teachers in promoting learning at all levels of education. Teachers are the key for learning and quality education, and this is what UNESCO and IICBA were all about. To achieve maximum learning benefits, a teacher policy must have a vision for the way forward and include a comprehensive and holistic approach. This approach encompasses a broad range of interlocking dimensions affecting how individuals choose to become and remain teachers, train for their work, and perform effectively with continuous professional development. So teacher policy really is something to get the best out of teachers. This workshop is about the key role of developing this holistic and comprehensive teacher policies, and demonstrated in different guides. More specifically, we have the following objectives. Number 1, to improve our knowledge and understanding of the teacher policy development process, the dimensions of a teacher policy, and how policy development work can be operationalized at the national levels. Number 2, to disseminate the various useful resources and tools for teacher policy development. Number 3, to identify areas of complementarity and the difference between the global guide and African contextualized guide to demonstrate how each tool is used according to objectives and under which circumstances. And number 4, finally, to create a platform for national stakeholders and education specialists and regional offices to share best practices and discuss solutions to challenge encountered technically supporting national teacher policy development. Excuse me. Now, this is a very exciting process, and I hope you are as excited as I am for the coming 2 hours. I would like to welcome country speakers from different regions in Africa who will present on the national context. We are particularly honored to welcome Dr. Jane Egao, my sister from Uganda, Director of Higher Technical Vocational Education and Training in the Ministry of Education and Sports in Uganda. Dr. Rayder Agassi, Deputy Minister for Teachers Affairs, Ministry of Education of Egypt. Ahlan wa sahlan. Madame Lorraine Ton, Directrice générale de l'encadrement pédagogique et de la formation initiale et continue du MENA-PLN Burkina Faso. And finally, Mr. Saipsi, on behalf of Mr. Augustin Odiogu, conseiller technique au ministère de l'Éducation nationale de Mali. So, thank you very much again for your participation, active participation, and I wish you all a productive workshop. Thank you very much. Back to you, Saliu.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup,
Yumiko. Thank you very, very much, Yumiko, Director of IICBA, for your opening remarks, and a warm welcome to you. Now, before handing over to Dr. Carlos Vargas Tames, I just wanted to say that we are now online with Dr. Kombu Bolibari, the UNHCR Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education. And thank you very, very much, Dr. Bolibari, for being with us this afternoon. And we'll hear from you as soon as we've heard from Dr. Carlos Vargas Tames. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Saliu, and thank you very much to all the participants who are with us in this workshop today. We are certainly very pleased to bring together partners from IICBA, from the Teacher Task Force membership, and from UNESCO, including building upon past experiences from the Norwegian Teacher Initiative. That's the case of 2 of the countries we will hear from today in the breakout session, and also other experiences from our work together with member states. I believe that the experiences from Uganda, Egypt, Burkina Faso, and Mali attest to this work, and they speak of the efforts needed to formulate and implement teacher policies. Now, in an effort to assist the complex process of policy formulation and implementation, we have developed 2 key resources that have been widely used in Africa and which will be presented and commented today in the working groups. On the one hand, the Teacher Policy Development Guide, first published by UNESCO and the TTF in 2015, and which has been updated in 2019, and also IICBA's contextualized guides on teaching policies and learning outcomes in sub-Saharan Africa, issues and options, which was released in 2016. Both guides advocate and support countries towards developing holistic and comprehensive teacher policies that are aligned to national contexts and that cover a wide array of dimensions in an integrated manner to strengthen the teacher profession needed to support sustainable education systems. Now, the discussions will also help us identify dimensions of teaching policy that need further unpacking, further development, maybe the specificity of some settings, of some context that beg for modifications, for a special emphasis on some dimensions more than others, or elements that might be lacking in terms of information. This will also help us further develop and use the both policy development guides. So we very much look forward to the presentations and discussions of how each has already been used and how we can continue to contribute to the development of effective teacher policy. Finally, I would just like to thank again and acknowledge all of our participants. We have also the co-chair of the TTF, Dr. Almedaires. Thank you very much for joining us from the Regional Center of Quality and Excellence in Education. And to all participants and presenters, I wish you a very fruitful discussion. So let me pass back the floor to Saliu Sal. Thank you, Saliu.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Carlos.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carlos Vargas Termes, head of the TTF and Secretary of International Section of Teacher Development at UNESCO. Thank you for that, and thank you for clarifying this workshop's stated aims. Now, before handing over to Madame Bolibari, I just wanted to welcome Mr. Steve Muitwich from IFRA, who is here representing his particular segment. Now, Dr. Kombu Bolibari, the special rapporteur for the UN on the right to education and head of education at UNESCO. Now, just for your information, Dr. Kombu Bolibari used to be Burkina Faso's minister, so I'm sure you will agree with me that she has a vast experience when it comes to the issue of teaching in general, and more specifically on teaching policy. So we're going to hear from her, and I'm sure she will give us insights into the importance of access to quality education and teacher policy. And Dr. Bolibari, if you can hear us, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Salim Salah. And I'd like to thank you for this forum. And I'd like to thank UNESCO and ICBA, and of course, its partners for involving me so quickly in this discussion forum and this exchange of opinions. It already demonstrates, in my opinion, the relevance of the commitment of UNESCO and its ICBA partners in terms of ensuring that all actors can cooperate with a view to realizing the right to quality education. And with your permission, I'd like to share a few thoughts. And the first major one is an expression of thanks to UNESCO and ICBA for the extremely important work that's been performed, because when you talk about realizing the right to education and the concern for quality, the most important paramount ingredient is a qualified body of teachers, and of course conscientious teachers who are aware of the challenges facing their profession. And that, I think, is a key dimension which you brought to the fore, and I certainly want to emphasize that crucial dimension for international education, but especially on the African continent, which you're focusing on today. And as I said, I'd like to share one or two salient points. When we talk about the quality of education, of course, the first ingredient is the teachers. But then I would also say that when you wish to produce policy for teachers, men and women teachers alike, we need to ensure that we have reliable data, and reliable data need to be collated at the country level. Those data also need to be broken down, and there needs to be ownership of those data, in my opinion. So that's the first key condition. And the second key element in terms of this educational policy is that we should also acknowledge that when we talk about quality teaching today, and especially when we want to professionalize teaching, we have to listen to the teachers. And this brings to the fore the key issue of participation of teachers' networks in all of these processes, whether at the local level or the international level. This is critical. And I really want to draw attention to the fact that regarding education and the COVID crisis, and the report I submitted to the UN General Assembly on it showed that the key lessons were that in some areas where there is dialogue, involvement, and participation of teachers' networks, the COVID crisis was much better managed, and the continuation of learning was much better organized. Where there was no listening to teachers, and where the states just tried to do everything off their own bat and according to their own devices, taking decisions divorced from the teachers' opinions. It didn't work. And that is one of the key findings. And I must stress this issue of participation of men and women teachers at all levels in this process, locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally alike. This is absolutely crucial. And then the second salient point I'd like to make is that when we want to develop teacher policy today in Africa, there are key tensions in terms of access and quality. How can we ensure that teachers recruited at an important level, at least the university graduates, and who've got the quality qualifications, then you need to have proper benchmarking. And in my opinion, there is this tension in terms of budgeting, but also the quest for skilled teachers. And that presupposes that we think in depth about this issue of organizing pedagogical conferences and also tutorship, all of this process at the national level and lessons learning. This is all vital if we are to address this key dimension, which I think is an essential one. And we also, I think, need to decolonize and democratize teacher policy, and also in the thinking among teachers. In some schools, when you still keep turning against a teacher or a pupil just for using their mother tongue, then I think that's really problematic. And I really think we need to help in terms of the way in which we break down our messages. And this is especially important in Africa, so that Africa gains ownership of its culture and its teacher policy. This is critical, because the teachers are going to be the levers for the continent tomorrow. They are going to bring up the future generations. They're going to nurture those future generations. And those teachers must convey the fundamental cultural values of Africa, hence the importance of the culture, art, and the history of Africa, and above all, as well, languages, which are part and parcel of the fertility of the African continent. Interruption by the chair. Could you sum up, please, says the chair? Yes, the last point I want to make is, of course, the question of science teaching. Is vital that these educational policies take account of science and also gender, to make sure that each male and female teacher, whatever level, will avoid issues of discrimination. And if we achieve that through laws and also at the international, regional, and national levels, and if we contextualize better, then I think we can make genuine progress in the best possible way. Thank you again. And I must repeat, no one in the world, neither an organization nor a family nor a student, can sufficiently thank the input of the teacher so that each student, each family, and each society on the African continent may benefit from this. So you must invest very strongly and enduringly, sustainably in the teaching profession. So thank you very much for allowing me to share these thoughts with you in this forum. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Barry, for that very important intervention. I was certainly right in saying that she has proven experience and expertise in the field of teacher training. So thank you very much for that plea, this cri de coeur, as it were, in support of the teaching profession and all the measures needed in the educational system, while also stressing the importance of developing appropriate, relevant, quality teacher training policies. So thank you very much again, Ms. Barry. And you've really laid the groundwork for today's workshop in terms of quality of teaching. So we've heard some very powerful words and thoughts expressed, and we shall now move into the breakout sessions, the parallel sessions. And during these breakout sessions, we will talk about issues pertaining to policy development in support of teachers and the responses provided in Africa. We'll listen to testimony from countries. We'll become familiar with the different guides which have been developed to support countries, and we'll discuss the main challenges and possible solutions identified on the continent. There are 3 language groups today which have already been set up. Those are an English language group, a French language group, and an Arabic language group. So we will split up into these three groups, depending on the language for which you've registered. If you've chosen English or French as your preferred language when you enrolled, you will automatically be moved to the relevant meeting room. If, however, you wish to change rooms, then please send a message on the chat and we will respond as soon as possible. If your Zoom version allows it, you can also click on your breakout room button at the bottom and choose the room you wish to attend. Please note that the plenary room, the one in which we're in at present, will be reserved for the countries of North Africa, the Arab countries, and interpretation will continue in that room. The sessions here will last a little more than an hour. We will revert to plenary to hear what the groups have to say and to discuss questions in greater depth. And we shall resume around 2:20 or 2:30 in an hour's time. And I wish you every success in your regional breakout sessions.
Breakout rooms. This may take a minute or a couple of minutes. So technicians, over to you. Donc rendez-vous dans les différents groupes.
So the breakout sessions are now called to order.
Welcome, everyone. We will start in a minute. if you think that you would like to be in the English-speaking room for Anglophone Africa or the French-speaking room for Francophone Africa, can you please put your name and the language you want in the chat, and we will move you as fast as we can. Thank you. So if you think you shouldn't be here, please let me know in the chat and we will move you. And if not, I will hand over to our moderator for this session, who is Ms. Samira Intikaldi. She will be, so this session will be in Arabic, but interpretation is available.
Thank you, Leila. اسمي سميرة القاضي من المغرب مدرسة سابقة ومفتشة تربوية.
So I'm from Morocco. I'm a former teacher and an education inspector now. And I'd like to welcome you to this meeting, which is reserved for the Arab countries from North Africa in the context of this teacher capacity building workshop organized with the TTF, UNESCO, and the International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, IICBA. We will benefit from the presence of His Excellency, the Deputy Minister of Education from Egypt. We welcome him. He's also a professor and an academic. We will also have a presentation of the contextualized guide on teaching policies and learning outcomes. And Mr. Hijazi is going to talk about Egypt's experience in developing its own teacher policy. And of course, the role of teachers has been highlighted recently, that leadership role that teachers play. And we've seen just how important the role of teachers is in crisis management, especially in dealing and grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges faced by schools, not to mention the contribution to SDG 4 and target C thereof. So today we're going to discuss teacher policy. How do we implement that policy? What are the challenges faced by countries in this context? And we would invite you to speak out and give your opinions in this meeting so that it is productive for each and every one of us. Now, before introducing Dr. Agassi, the Deputy Minister of Egypt, could I ask participants, if they so wish, and if there are volunteers, to be rapporteur of this meeting? Is there someone who would volunteer to be the rapporteur for our meeting? Do we have any volunteers? Leila, perhaps, or Maram. We don't seem to have any volunteers until now. So perhaps one of you two could deal with the report of this meeting. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Rayder Agassi, who is the Deputy Minister of Education of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Thank you for being with us, first of all. Mr. Agassi is the Deputy Education Minister, and he's also a professor at the Teaching Evaluation Institute. He chairs the Adult Education Center, which is associated with UNESCO. He began as a chemistry teacher at the start of his career with several positions in adult education and combating illiteracy in particular. He's published many books and studies in the field of pedagogy. And Mr. Agassi, you have the floor, and thank you again for being with us.
دكتور رضا هل يمكن فتح الصوت؟ شكرا
Mr.
جزيلا.
Agassi, you have the floor. You need to unmute your mic. Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this meeting. And firstly, may I thank you personally for that introduction, reminding us that there can be no progress without progress in teaching. Teachers are the backbone of education, and they are indispensable to progress. This goes without saying, in my opinion, but I repeat it nonetheless. And in the context of digital evolution and transformation, and in the post-COVID era, the objectives of education will change, the content of education will also change, and teacher policy and the role of teachers must also be in step with those changes. And we need clear-cut policies to meet the current day needs. In Egypt, we have four major challenges, four major areas of work. Firstly, the recruitment policy. How can we recruit more teachers, and how should we deploy them? That's an issue we're tracking very closely. Secondly, how can we guarantee due promotion for teachers? Thirdly, continuous training, ongoing training of teachers, and job satisfaction for teachers to ensure that those skills are up to date. We think that's of paramount importance. And so I'm going to focus on three issues now. Firstly, quality of access policy. Secondly, well, the first is quality policy, the second is access policy, and the third is capacity building and empowerment of teachers. Now, we created the Teacher Training Academy in 2007, and one of the representatives of that academy is attending this meeting. And that academy was set up pursuant to a presidential decree in order to meet three goals. Firstly, guaranteeing the quality of education. Secondly, ensuring the quality of certification for exercising the teaching profession. And thirdly, a key priority for the future, creating the link between teacher training colleges and the schools.
The aim of this being that teachers will be able to move between one and the other, between schools and the training institute. In other words, we're talking about new teachers and experienced teachers. I would also like to underscore that the 155 Act of 2007 and the 129 Act of 2008, these two laws that were passed enabled the creation of this Teachers Training Academy in Egypt, so as to ensure quality training for our teachers, which will have positive repercussions for education and teaching in general. What you can see on this slide here are these two acts that were passed. The objective of the Professional Teacher Training Academy is based on a set criteria which can be adapted over time as required. For example, the criterion for professional development are currently actually being overhauled as we speak because of the COVID crisis. So one of the missions of this teacher training academy is to stipulate the indicators and criteria. A second objective is to issue certificates to the teachers to give them the necessary authorization to conduct their teaching profession. And the third mission is to ensure quality of teaching in Egypt, be it teachers in public in public education institutions or in private or religious institutions. We are very focused on guaranteeing the quality of the content of the teaching and the teaching policy. A fourth objective is the cooperation between the educational institutions on the one hand and research institutes on the other. How are teachers appointed? Well, first of all, they are supposed to have undergone training at the university level. They need to have a qualification from the university or from the teacher training academy. Next, for a period of 2 years, the teacher will start as an assistant teacher, and once the new teacher has acquired the necessary range of skills, they can be promoted to the post of teacher. What you can see on this slide is that the new teacher will first of all start as an assistant teacher, and then subsequently, if the necessary skills are not actually acquired, the contract will not lead to a promotion. But if the skills are required, then promotion can take place and the person can be promoted to the post of teacher. Next. As a part of the professionalization, our teacher development, we have a promotion program. In order to ensure that teachers do actually develop over the course of their career, we have online virtual teacher upskilling programs to ensure their professional development and assist them in their drive to move up through the ranks. We therefore have different categories and different teacher posts, and we have different roles assigned to each different category, be they teachers, lead teachers, and finally the highest ranking teachers. Teachers who hold the higher orientation ranks need to be duly qualified for such roles, and the same goes for headmaster or headmistress roles in schools. Furthermore, we also work with professional autonomy processes. In fact, we actually have a skills competence recognition program. For example, if I'm a teacher who's qualified as an English teacher, I could actually then move forward and study English at the university level and become further qualified as a result of that extra study. Furthermore, we have actually developed quality training programs for nursery school teaching staff and community teaching as well, so as to ensure the broadest possible access to education. And we've given some priority to these types of programs. Moreover, we have the issue of professional development and continuing education or continuing training for teachers. It is necessary for this continuous training, be of a hybrid nature. In other words, in situ and online at the same time. Teachers, even those currently active in the profession, always need to continue improving their skills and competence. And that is why in 2012, because of the ministerial decision, we set up 7 different modules to ensure that all teachers are able to take up continuing education courses on a weekly basis. And teachers are thus invited to follow a one-week course. A course once a year. And this is part of our continuous training program. We feel that it should be accompanied by other measures. For example, these continuous training should be given by experts or by university specialists, and that is actually the next phase of our work in this field. Another consideration is that we make sure, in terms of our teacher autonomy development program, we ensure that there is an appropriate salary offered to the teachers' salaries should be appropriate. In other words, from 2012 to 2020, there is a 50% salary increase envisaged, and we're currently working through that. There is also a special fund for the healthcare services provided to teaching staff. Moreover, we have a draft bill currently going through Parliament about the status of female teachers, and particularly as concerns maternity leave and a 5-year and the way that dovetails with the 5-year precondition for a promotion. And so in the name of non-discrimination, maternity leave is not considered time out from that 5-year period. Also, with UNESCO, we've been looking at creating a distance learning hub for teacher development. And this center will be set up with the assistance of UNESCO, and we have a plan to use this at the regional level. So it's not going to be only in UNESCO, but also have a broader outreach thanks to the regional office, the UNESCO regional office. Other recommendations are as follows. Firstly, in terms of the performance of teachers, well, the performance should be subject to review. And especially in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, it's also important to create capacity development platforms. These platforms need to be regional in nature and also continent-wide. These are platforms that we are looking at developing hand in hand with UNESCO. In order to enhance teaching praxis, we think that this needs to be disseminated via a platform, and creative teachers who have best practices should have some kind of platform at their disposal in order to disseminate their work, and that is why we are looking at an Africa-wide platform. Also, there are competitions organized so as to stimulate teaching staff. There are also best practice exchanges between countries and expertise exchange when it comes to teacher promotion. It's important for education for sustainable development to be made a part of teacher training. And we are of the belief that it's also important to target certain categories certain age groups of the population, particularly when it comes to what we call the second chance schools or community learning centers. We are also looking at adopting a school-centered approach and creating a learning community. Another consideration is mentoring or coaching of teachers, particularly with more experienced teachers, and being able to work as a mentor for the upcoming junior staff. There's been more for mentoring than for inspection per se. Now, I hope it didn't take up too much time. I just wanted to share with you some of these aspects of our experience in Egypt as concerns teacher development.
Samira, you're muted. Samira.
معذرة شكرا معالي نائب وزير التربية والتعليم لشؤون
Yes, forgive me. Yes, thank you. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Deputy Minister for Education, Dr. Rayder Hijazi. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. You have shared with us some very important ideas concerning recruitment and deployment, promotion, development of skills, autonomy promotion or autonomy development. All of these are very important aspects. And you've given us, I think, some very good recommendations and ideas, particularly when it comes to the idea of maintaining updated skills performance indicators and sharing of best practices. It's already been shown that a collaborative approach is beneficial not only for teachers, but also for learners. Furthermore, this can leave a certain room for the creativity of teachers and the striving for excellence through the competitions that you mentioned, as well as this school-centered approach that you mentioned, and the importance of the learning community. So thank you again very, very much, Dr. Rayder Hijazi, for all of those insights in your presentation. Now, I should like to hand over to Mr. Mohamed Alawi from Mauritania, who's going to share with us some of the guides created by UNESCO for teachers and teacher policy created by UNESCO. And before we hear from him, I'd just like to mention to anyone who is interested, we do need a rapporteur for our breakout session. Do I have a volunteer for a rapporteur, please? Otherwise, I'll have to just point my finger and choose someone. Mr. Ashraf, would you please consider being our rapporteur for our session?
I think Samira.
Mr. Ashraf.
Samira?
No, Mr. Abdurrahman?
Malak has offered to do it. Malak Zalouk.
Let me explain. Dr. Malak Zalouk, عليكم
شكرا
السلام.
دكتورة ملك.
I will report back in the plenary, but I will not do a report. I'm just going to report back in the plenary.
Yes, report to the
Thank you.
plenary. That's what I meant.
Yes.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Dr. Malak.
Yeah.
إذن أعطي الكلمة للأستاذ محمد علوي. شكرا لك على.
In which case, we can hand over to Mr. Mohamed Alawi. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. You have the floor so that we can hear more about UNESCO's guides. Thank you.
أنا يعني أخصائي تربية في يونسكو وكذلك مسؤول مكتب المشاريع يونسكو في موريتانيا.
Thank you. I'm in charge of the Projects Bureau in Mauritania, and I'm delighted to join you here for today's proceedings. If my colleagues in UNESCO could please run the PowerPoint, I'd be most grateful. Thank you. I'm sorry, my internet connection appears to be somewhat weak. So perhaps I shall actually switch off my video so that the connection might be better, because I can see that here in Mauritania, my internet connection isn't so strong. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Rayder Agassi, the previous speaker, and send my thanks to all of the participants in today's session. Welcome to this regional virtual capacity building workshop on teacher policy development in Africa. This is organized by IICBA, and we want to, which is obviously, as you know, the capacity building institution of UNESCO and also the TTF. So as I was saying, I'm in charge of the projects desk of UNESCO in Mauritania. And the projects desk is part of the UNESCO Regional Bureau in Rabat. Now, today, I should like to introduce you to some of the teacher policy development work. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about IICBA. It was established in 1999, and it's the only UNESCO Category 1 institute in Africa. It is based in the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and has a team of 25 people from some 12 countries. And the mandate of IICBA is to strengthen teacher policy and development. Madam Makazaki is in charge of this, and secondly, the development of teachers in Africa. Concerns the teacher task force, its full name being the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030, known also by its initials TTF. This is a global alliance which works on advocacy, knowledge sharing, and also lends support to countries concerning Target 4C of SDG 4. It has 157 members from nearly 100 countries and representing countries and organizations. And CSOs, private sector, UN agencies, etc. So in total, 157 members in the TTF from 98 countries and 59 organized, and it's hosted at UNESCO and has been since 2008, and it is the largest alliance working on education generally, but also specifically on teaching. And it's also the largest alliance in terms of member countries.
Now, I wanted to address the specific issue of this workshop. Why should we focus on teachers? Teachers are, as Dr. Agassi said in his statement, the key labor force. They are the central drivers in the educational system, and you cannot have an educational system without teachers. So they are the backbone of the teaching process and the educational process. So they are the most influential factor in guaranteeing quality education, and they have a major impact on the future of our children. And there are many challenges that teachers are having to grapple with, especially in Africa, and UNESCO believes that the greatest challenge faced by sub-Saharan Africa is the shortage of teachers. If the 2030 education agenda is to be achieved, So it means ensuring quality education, which is fair for all, and strengthening education opportunities throughout life for each and everyone. So there's a crisis in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, that is this dearth, this acute shortage of teachers, and countries need to fill that gap in order to meet their education commitments. There are other challenges, particularly gender inequality and the recruitment of unskilled teachers who've not been properly trained. And the recruitment of teachers and their working conditions are very important dimensions. And at present, those two factors do not allow teachers to do their job in the best possible conditions. There's also the problem of inappropriate curricula, as well as the low level of learning. And in order to meet all of these challenges, UNESCO and ICBA and the TTF, that is the Teacher Task Force, are supporting African countries in developing strategies and policies for teacher training and the development of school textbooks. All of this ultimately to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And all of this is only possible thanks to international cooperation spanning UNESCO and its regional centers, especially in the least developed countries. And all of this is intended to meet the strategic objectives set by the African Union for the African continent. The next slide, please. I now want to talk about teachers in the context of the African continent. As you know, this most recent decade has seen unprecedented challenges in terms of access to teaching throughout Africa, and the progress made has been substantial in meeting that challenge, particularly in reducing school dropout rates. According to UNESCO statistics and other regional and international organizations, the statistics are very encouraging. Nonetheless, there are still challenges and problems which have to be overcome. So we've seen recruitment of teachers with differing levels of skills. I hope you can still hear me. Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead, says the moderator. Well, if you can hear me clearly, yes, go ahead. Your voice is coming across loud and clear. So as I was saying, there's been a process of recruitment of teachers with very different skills and a contractual process. And unfortunately, many of these teachers are poorly qualified. And there is a major lack of opportunities for upskilling and upgrading of teachers' abilities in many African countries. And this requires urgent intervention if we are to achieve solutions for this category of teachers so that their skills can be upgraded, their qualifications can be improved, and so that they are afforded an opportunity for professional development so that they can work properly in proper conditions, and so that they can impart to the students quality education and teaching. Now I want to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and the implications for teacher policy. The pandemic and its repercussions, particularly the closing of schools in many countries over a long period, and the return to school have posed major challenges. With a lack of social dialogue and communication, problems of health and safety, and the lack of digital tools for swift communication between teachers and parents and teachers and pupils, students. There are also problems in terms of financial resources, investment, and teacher salaries. And that is why last year, the TTF, the Teacher Task Force, drew up a guide for political decision makers in developing countries, especially Africa, in order to support them in their efforts to get kids back to school. And that guidance spans 7 dimensions in order to guarantee quality education in this context of the pandemic. Those 7 dimensions are social dialogue and communication, health and safety, psychological well-being, and social and emotional well-being of students, training of teachers, deployment of teachers and rights of teachers. The sound has frozen, as has the video. Mohammed, we can no longer hear you. So we've lost our link with our connection with Dr. Mohammed Alawi. So we'll wait for him to come back. Can you hear me? Back to you, Mohammed, you have the floor. Well, I'm going to switch off my video because there's an internet connection issue here. And Mohammed, with your permission, you only have 5 minutes left. Mr. Alawi, thank you. Very well. So I was talking about this guidance for policymakers spanning 7 dimensions: social dialogue and communication, health and safety, psychological well-being, teacher training, deployment of teachers, teachers' rights, and working conditions and financial resources and investment, and then monitoring and evaluation. That is an exhaustive set of guidance spanning all dimensions pertaining to teachers and ensuring quality education. And we can give you this guidance after this meeting. And I briefly like to refer to other guides because I don't have much time left. So there was a second guide which deals with teacher policy, a teacher policy development guide. And policies for teachers, for the sake of teachers, can be an impediment if we are to achieve our goals, as many policies are piecemeal, and very often there are contradictions between different policies, which mean we can't attain those objectives. And that is why we need to develop exhaustive policies in order to ensure the effectiveness of those policies. So we need 2 ingredients. Firstly, we need a national countrywide vision, and we need to coordinate all teacher policy at that national level. Each national strategy for education needs to be incorporated, mainstreamed into the whole overall policy of the country by creating coordination mechanisms with other sectors that are part and parcel of the country's strategy. so that this whole statewide system contributes to the attainment of the education goals. The next slide, please. As regards guides for teaching policies, the TTF and UNESCO have different guides and tools to help the member states to develop their teacher policies. And in this context, steps have been taken to develop a number of guides to help the member states to formulate and implement their policies, particularly teaching policies and learning outcomes in sub-Saharan Africa, a contextualized guide produced by ICBA in 2016. There's also a guide for teacher development policy produced by the TTF in 2019. And there's also a methodological guide for analyzing teacher issues produced by the IIEP in 2010. And all of these guides are available and translated into several different languages, and they're at your disposal. As regards Sub-Saharan African countries guide on teaching policies and learning outcomes, this refers to exhaustive education policies, comprehensive education policies, and how to achieve SDG 4 in the Sustainable Development Agenda. And the main phases in teacher development policy, teacher policy development, in each country. And the way of tracking progress in attaining these goals. Now, I don't want to go through all the guides, but they're at your disposal. And we in UNESCO are at your disposal to answer your questions. But we only have 2 minutes left. So I just very briefly wanted to introduce you to these guides in the next slide. There's a guide on teacher development policy, which you can see on the screen. And the TTF has worked with the Open University in the United Kingdom in developing and drafting the first guide for teacher policy development, available in 5 languages, including Arabic. Among the other guides and other tools which are available,
أدوات شكرا الأدوات التي أعدتها اليونسكو نجد كذلك منصة
there is also a teacher task force knowledge sharing platform established in October 2020. It's an electronic portal which is open to member states and all other stakeholders with information on teacher development policy, as well as data, which allow all these stakeholders working in this area to find the latest information. And it also allows them to share their experience and information through this e-portal. And this is a very important platform, as you know, for exchanging experience. Experience exchange is very important to UNESCO. It's something UNESCO keenly encourages.
لدليل إعداد السياسات الخاصة بالمعلمين يعني هذه آخر نقطة اللي نطرق لها قبل النقطة قبل الأخيرة.
And a last point on teacher training. There are key dimensions in respect of each teacher development policy. Firstly, recruitment and retaining teachers, and then the various phases of training for intake and upskilling, and then there's also working conditions, employment, structures, salaries, bonuses, professional standards, and responsibilities of teachers, and lastly, school management. So this guide spans all of these key issues for teacher development policy, beginning with the very first day when a teacher is first hired, right up until the day he or she retires. So everything needed. And this guide is provided to the member states, and it presupposes that the member state is going to involve teacher networks and teacher representatives in this process. It refers to the role of donors and international partners for each country as well in teacher policy development. And there are 5 phases, 5 stages in developing teacher policy. The first phase is consultations with stakeholder groups. Then you have the agenda. Thirdly, policy, governance, communication, and lastly, monitoring. And there are a few countries who've benefited from this guide. You see Benin, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Guinea, Lesotho, and other African countries.
لكي لا أطيل نمر التوصيات.
And now I'll move on to recommendations. Thank you. Now, as far as the recommendations are concerned, the main recommendation is the need for dialogue, improving the dialogue with all stakeholders in all countries. Without dialogue, there can be no effective policy. An effective policy needs to involve all stakeholders. There also needs to be good planning for that dialogue and for policy implementation. There's also a need for there to be genuine political will. If there is no political will to implement and formulate such teacher policy, then no country will succeed.
And so I would like to encourage all of the participants here who are in charge at the country level of these kinds of policies do understand that this is necessary. And without it, there can be no successful policy. What is also required is that there are structures in charge of managing the development of national teacher policies and social dialogue too. And so if we're going to formulate and implement teacher policy effectively, it's also important to have donors on board right from the outset of the policy development process, because they need to adopt the support for these policies and support it all the way through. Thank you very, very much. And obviously, I'm open to any questions, should anyone wish to pose any. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohamed Alawi, for the presentation you've given us on these various different guides that can actually help Arab countries and North African countries in their teacher policy development. You talked about a few challenges, such as the shortage of teachers or the poor learning outcomes. You also talked about some very useful guides, for example, the Teacher Policy Development Guide, and you talked about the 9 different aspects covered that are prerequisites for a successful teacher policy. And you mentioned, for example, the importance of teacher training, deployment of teachers, evaluation and monitoring. You also talked about the need for having a comprehensive approach to policy development. And now it's time for us to have a broader discussion among ourselves. I see Dr. Arafal, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, my thanks to the TTF and to ICBA. I'm Abdulrahman Idris, and I am co-chair of the TTF. I should like to mention one very important consideration. Currently, we are facing a major challenge. We have some 20 years left ahead of us to reach the SDG 4 out of all of the SDGs. We are currently seeing a shortfall in terms of quality of teaching and learning. The Vice Minister, Mr. Rayder and Mohamed Alawi said, you really can't talk about quality teaching, quality learning without having quality teaching, because it's those teachers that are actually going to ensure the deliverance of those objectives. So if really you want to deliver on SDG 4, we need massive investment in teacher policy. Because without this, there can be no success. It's important to come up with programs that can assist teachers in reaching that desired level of excellence. We have been working in centers of excellence for teaching in African and Arab countries, along with the TTF, so as to achieve exactly this. We've undertaken studies in the field over 7 months, and on the 29th of July, we will be able to present the outcomes of that study, which was a 7-month study. We've also set up a regional workshop for teacher capacity building in Arab and African countries, and I'd invite everyone to come and take part in that workshop. We've talked a lot about policy development, but I think we also need to talk about implementation of such policies, and we need to discuss that more, and we'll do that in our workshop. Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor, for that. I'd like to, Mr. Abdulrahman talked about the need for teacher policy formulation, comprehensive, all-encompassing policies, and quite often these policies tend to be fragmentary. What are the challenges that we're facing if we're going to, what challenges are we facing in North African countries and Arab countries? And how did you manage to resolve these problems in some countries? How did you manage to adapt an exhaustive, comprehensive teacher policy in your countries? Dr. Ashraf, you have the floor. First of all, my thanks to Dr. Rayder, Vice Minister. I'm from Egypt, I'm Egyptian, and I perfectly agree with what he was saying. My name is Ashraf Musa, and I'm a teacher. I was selected in accordance with criteria, as Dr. Rayder Hijazi was saying, and I became a representative, or if you like, a model of the successful teacher policy adopted in Egypt. We were talking about challenges in Arab and North African countries. I would say we have a very good model in Egypt that could actually be replicated in other countries. One of the challenges that we had to focus on was the terminology. There are lots of publications and useful guides. They're all very well, but unfortunately, when it comes to terminology, the vocabulary used doesn't always feel harmonized, and they're not well translated into some of the African languages. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yundrima, you have the floor. Lindwi, you have the floor. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, Mr. Lindwi. Lindwi, are you able to hear us? Or Dr. Malak Zalouk, you have the floor. Madame Malak Zalouk. Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to talk about two key issues, if I could. First of all, my thanks to the speakers for their presentations. One very important consideration among the challenges that we're facing is that we do not utilize earlier findings. We don't always build upon what some of the progress achieved in the past has shown us. For example, we have a teaching corpus that is full of experience, of very rich experience and accumulated expertise, and that is a true treasure trove of experience. But unfortunately, to date, at least, we don't utilize that, at least in the Arab countries. Unfortunately, this treasure trove of experience is available on the Arab League website only. Secondly, the voice of teachers themselves. It's important that we listen to teachers. And I just wanted to welcome what was said by Dr. Rayder Hijazi. He pointed this out. He spoke of the need to get teachers on board, help them participate. But for decades now, teachers have been saying that even though we try to adopt policies, for example, encouraging professional development, they're not available. They don't have the availability or enough balance in their lives, given their workloads, to actually make the most of those development opportunities. And so it's important that we listen to the voice of teachers in this and other areas. We need to use channels of communication with teachers and their representatives. This professional academy that has been created in Egypt is excellent. And I am one of the founders of that teacher training academy. And personally, the main objective of that academy is the optimization of teachers' expertise, making sure that they are autonomous scientifically, socially, materially, and it's important for teachers to be brought on board when it comes to designing school manuals, for example. And so there are different ways of getting teachers to participate in the process and to use teachers' expertise. I think we will be able to reach our teacher development objectives only if teachers are true stakeholders, true participants, which means that they need to be heard at the school level, at the academy level, and when it comes to the leadership of teachers, but also in national teacher policies. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Malak Zaluk. When we heard from Dr. Rayder Agassi and talking about promoting the autonomy of teachers and teacher promotion and quality, I'd like to add the notion of inclusion of teachers. Now, Madam Jalila Labidi has the floor. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. We are development partners when it comes to teachers, and I'd like to welcome Alexo's efforts in this domain. The organization has set up 2 projects in particular that, forgive me, says the interpreter, the sound quality does not permit interpretation. Interpretation will resume when sound quality permits. As part of the Arab framework for improving teacher quality launched by the World Bank, Alexo was able to start implementing a project called Meet the Teachers. It's the Queen Anya Khamen Academy that was able to take on board this project, the aim of which was to go out and meet teachers, hear what they have to say about their own well-being, their economic situation, and the outcomes of this are actually on the Alexo website and could be taken into consideration as an example of best practice when it comes to drafting of guides and in terms of training, as was mentioned earlier. I wanted to draw everybody's attention to this project, and we have some more examples to share with you if anyone is interested. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madame Jalila, for those comments. Another question, how to develop or what are the teacher policy development dimensions that need capacity building in North African countries? The floor is to Mr. Momen Khatoum. You have the floor. If not, the floor is open if anybody would like to take it and answer this particular question. So what difficulties are there implementing a teacher policy development and that require further capacity building? So Mohamed, you were asking for the floor? Yes, the floor is yours. Mohamed Alawi or Mr. Mohamed Khatoum. Thank you very much for that. Just a couple of words, if I may. I think there is a veritable danger jeopardizing teaching in the Arab world, and it could be an absolute disaster in the next 10 or 15 years. And I'm saying this as from a student's perspective. I know that there are huge challenges. I'm one of the youngest in the teaching community, and I'm monitoring very, very closely all the developments in teaching. I think there's a huge problem that looks like it's only going to get worse in the future. Where are we with AI, artificial intelligence? Are we going to sign some kind of ceasefire or peace truce? Because I think as a young teacher, I can say this, AI really is jeopardizing the profession. Are we going to sign a truce between all of the teaching professions and AI? Because I honestly see it as a huge threat. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Now, Mr. Mohamed Alawi, before we go back into plenary, one last intervention. Over to you, sir. Mr. Mohamed Alawi, you have the floor. Yes, I think we're coming to the end of this breakout session. I just wanted to thank all of the speakers, Mr. Al-Agassi, Mr. Alawi, and everyone who took the floor, Dr. Malak, Dr. Halal, and Jalal Halidi. All of you, I want to thank you for your works now. And I'm going to hand over to Mr. Alawi for some final comments before we move back into plenary. Thank you. Yes, and now we're going to call everybody back into plenary. Thank you. Yes, very well. Just one final minute. We are wrapping up. Thank you, and then we'll be back to Carlos. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to once again extend my thanks to all of you. And after having heard from some of the teacher representatives among us here today, I do think that you know, as we often do in here in UNESCO, we try to wrap up. And I think there were the three takeaways. First, the centrality of teachers in the system. Secondly, autonomy development, which is vital if we're going to have an inclusive quality education. And it is absolutely vital that we talk about the stimulation and autonomy and the collaborative approach to teacher policy development of a collective nature. This is it's vital that we have teacher policy development that puts teachers at the heart of the construction of these policies. And I would have liked to have shared with you the experience we had in Mauritania. UNESCO has been offering us some support when it comes to educational reforms for the implementation of new teaching policies. And in that context, we have bolstered capacities of our inspectors and teachers so as to roll out guides or teacher training guides for different for teacher training institutes. And this is perhaps a subject that we could discuss more in depth at another time. The Mauritanian approach, I think, which really does dovetail perfectly with the issues that we've been discussing today. And one final point, someone talked about the discrepancy in terminology between the North African countries and the work on done on these guides. UNESCO is working on the terminology of its guides so that it can reflect as closely as possible the situation on the ground, so that everyone can identify with what is there. Thank you very, very much to our moderator, Madame Idel Kadi, back to you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohamed Malawi. I just wanted to offer a few takeaways.
Perhaps I'd like to say that this is in keeping with what Mr. Kaliba said. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Samira and Mohammed. We also were able to listen to the outcomes of the group in Arabic. So very happy to start the session with that. Welcome back to everybody to the plenary session. we will now have the opportunity to reflect on what were some of the challenges that were shared in the breakout groups in the English, the French, and the Arabic groups. We've already heard, I would say, from group 3, but we will come back to that. Basically, what we want to do is bring together the lessons that have been learned and the potential solutions from the different experiences that we heard, particularly around policy development and implementation, and the role of context in actually enabling this process. This is something that we will find also very useful in further developing the teacher policy development guides and some of the modules thereafter. So let's hear from group number 1. In 5 minutes, my colleague Victoria from IICBA will present the synthesis and the main challenges and opportunities that were presented in group 1. So Victoria, you have the floor in 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlos. Allow me to switch off my video because I'll be reading and it will be awkward with my nonverbal communication. So, but I'll be reading some of the things that we've noted. So thank you very much. I'm presenting on behalf of the English group, which had quite an interesting discussion, and I'll make sure that I summarize it in 5 minutes. We began with a presentation from Uganda, which was done by Dr. Jane Egau, the Director for Basic Education, and she talked about the teacher development process, like giving a whole diagnosis in terms of where they started from with their diagnostic study all through into the implementation phase. And she highlighted how they had used the teacher policy development guide and how they had been supported by IICBA and the TTF, and then eventually launched the document on the World Teachers Day, which was 5th of October. But something that was very interesting is like she highlighted the different phases. There are about 10 phases that they went through while they're developing the national teacher policy, which began with, of course, undertaking a diagnostic study and then setting up country teams, and then eventually having lots of consultations and several processes that were highlighted in there. And then finally they had cabinet approval. And then finally they're now implementing the policy. So there were questions that were asked from the different countries regarding the process. And she highlights in her speech that the policy was heavily linked on the 9 dimensions that had been presented within the guide, the international guide for teacher policy development. And then there were many questions that were asked to her. One of them was the issue about stakeholder involvement in this process. And of course, they wanted to know how did teachers participate in the development of the policy? How did you engage them? And then she highlighted that they used the teacher unions to have dialogue with the teachers. And I think before there were lots of strikes from teachers in Uganda because their issues were not being addressed. But because the diagnostic study had also highlighted the need to have a social dialogue framework and plus sit in dialogue with the teachers, that's how they were able to involve them in the teacher policy development process. Then there was also a very critical issue that was highlighted by several countries. We have issues around the costing of the education policy. How did you eventually come up with the costing of the policy? She mentions that as they were developing the policy, they were looking at the 9 dimensions, and then they had sub-teams within the 9 dimensions, which were able to eventually break down the different costs for the key processes that would be involved to develop the components within the 9 dimensions. And they also worked with the ministry, the National Planning Authority and the like to make sure that they have the entire costing of the policy, which was heavily supported by UNESCO and other entities. Then we had questions from Nigeria concerning the strategies. Is it better to have a holistic approach, or it's better to use a fragmented approach in terms of policy development? Because they find that if you take a holistic approach, it can be so overwhelming to the country in terms of implementation, in terms of costing. But the experiences from Eritrea were also indicating that they have different levels and sources which are informing their policy development process, but I think they have preferred to take on the holistic approach, even though they're learning a lot from other countries, and they're having a lot of international experts who are coming in, and also they are finding the UNESCO guides very handy in terms of helping them with the process, and are looking forward to collaborating with more of the countries, and Uganda was a very good experience for them in learning. Then there was also a comment from Somalia that they were appreciative of the international guidance. They have been able to set up their task force. Of course, they still have issues of challenges around data management for teachers, finances to manage the entire process. And but they're thankful that they were able to participate in this event. There are quite a lot of other discussions that we presented around the policy experience for Uganda, and they wanted to know more about how do you anchor issues of teacher reward and remuneration in the policy. How about now in the context of COVID-19? How do we feature in these new pedagogical and technological challenges that have come through? And then about trying to find out how do you develop the implementation of the policy, but then there was also some guidance that it's better to develop a costed implementation plan side by side with the policy, so that both can move together and it can be approved at the government level. Now, we had the last part of it, we had a presentation of the guide, the TTF guide, and also the IICBA guide. And there were a summary of key findings that were highlighted regarding how to use these guides in terms of the processes, and also in terms of the key lessons learned. So allow me to conclude with that. So in terms of the processes, it's like they have learned that as you're using the guide, this was presented by our colleague Binyam and then Peter, and for countries that have used the guide, effective dialogue is time consuming for a better policy, and then but the commitment of national governments is essential for continued dialogue. And then the other aspect was that development partners also need to be brought on board because they play a key role in policy development processes. And then the other thing is that we have a lot of robust structures and procedures at country level, and usually that also affects the effectiveness of dialogues for teachers or social dialogues for teachers at country level when it comes to implementing some of these key aspects that I talked about in the dimensions. And then in terms of using the guide, prioritization of the dimensions is left to the countries basically to contextualize. Some countries prefer some priorities over the others depending on the country needs and contexts. So they may not take in all the 9 dimensions. And then other countries have ended up even adding new dimensions, like in Benin, they added a dimension of teacher autonomy. In Benin, they also added social dialogue, and it was the same for Guinea and Togo. So it's not that the 9 dimensions are really static, but they are being contextualized as countries see fit. And then
sorry, Victoria, if you can wrap up in 30 more seconds, please.
Yes, I'm saying the last sentence. Thank you very much. And then in terms of enhancing policy dialogue and making sure that everybody is involved, of course, consensus building is a challenge, which was highlighted also in Dr. Jen's presentation, but fostering national ownership of the process is very crucial. And this should not only stop at national ownership, but also involving international development partners to provide support so that there is a clear collaboration for all stakeholders as the policy is being developed. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for a very complete report of our discussions in the working group. Let me now give the floor to Ms. Malak Saluk, who will be giving us a synthesis of Group 3 for the Arab speaking group. We've already heard from Mohammed Alawi as we came in. So Malak, if you could keep it to 3 minutes, that would be ideal.
Sure. First of all, we had a very excellent presentation from Dr. Rayder Agassi, who outlined clearly the role of the Professional Academy for Teachers as a structure that was put in place in Egypt in 2007 for purposes of quality assurance and teacher licensure. So there was a lot on quality assurance and empowerment as well. It was also meant to be an accreditation structure. Also, very importantly, he spoke about career paths and how teachers went through several career paths as they went up the ladder, reaching expertise as the final part of career path. Also, he spoke quite a bit about the idea of having sufficient portals and websites to encourage teachers to post and to be recognized with their work. And he spoke of the efforts of training and putting through online 330,000 teachers. Also, he spoke about the fact that all of this had to be quite holistic to include various forms of learning and education, such as STEM schools and community schools, etc., and the special education. But also there was quite a bit on how to change from a training culture to a CPD culture that is school-based. And also finally, he spoke about the existence of a teacher fund to support teachers. There were some recommendations, particularly for the post-COVID era, and to look at the different roles and also to establish new standards, to have new contests for teachers, to have enough portals with the support of UNESCO to set up best practices and to exchange experiences. So this was largely Dr. Rayder Agassi. We also had some additions from the floor. Very briefly, there was a lot of emphasis on the idea of empowerment, sustainability, collaboration was an important one, and also participation, emphasizing the fact that teachers need to participate at different levels in their role as leadership at the school level, at the directorate level, and at the national level, so that the voices are constantly heard. Research is a very big component of how teachers' voices are heard, and also career paths need to be taken into account, particularly when we're thinking of teachers as curriculum writers, teachers as coaches, mentors, teachers as also researchers. So all of these are important career paths. So all of this was a dynamic discussion to add on to the presentation, the excellent presentation by Dr. Rayder Agassi. We also had the presentation from Dr. Mohammed Alawi, where he, from Mauritania, where he basically talked about the different guides for policy formulation at the various levels. And I think the main takeaway from his presentation was the challenges in sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, the dearth of teachers and the dearth of qualified teachers. And some of the post-COVID challenges were largely online training, issues related to health risks, but also wages were very important. And that we need to be looking quite holistically at the national goals and when looking at those guides, and also making sure that all the various sectors are working together towards those guides, and that we finally that we would be wary of having structures in place, that we would be concerned with the issues of employment, wages, standards, again, governance, and to ensure that partnerships were widely spread, particularly with donors, as a whole. One last point that was made by Alexo and myself was also the fact that we need to rely on the efforts that were done in the past. There's a lot of good work out there that needs to also be consulted as we move on to this new phase. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Malak, for this synthesis. I think we continue hearing about some of the challenges in terms of financing, and just to remind everybody that the TTF has a financing campaign that you can connect to, and that we can add these arguments as to what is needed in terms of future policy development, the institutionality that we have already heard from National Teacher Council, to development of standards, things that need to be costed and amounted for. Thank you very much, Malak, for that excellent synthesis. And finally, let me pass the floor to Ms. Suzanne Miranda, who will present the outcomes of the group 2, the French-speaking group. So please, Suzanne, in 2
Bonjour
minutes.
à tous, merci.
Bonjour.
Oui, je peux faire la présentation en français?
Yes. Can I do this presentation in
Oui,
French?
bien sûr,
Yes, of
de
course.
l'interprétation.
You have interpretation. Thank you. So I'm going to refer to the recommendations from Mali, because we weren't able to have Burkina Faso with us. Mr. C from the Bamako office in Mali referred to the national experience in Mali, and he referred to the new 2030 agenda and the 2063 agenda of the African Union. And the Malian government has pledged to step up its recruitment of teachers by developing a new curriculum, which has pushed or prompted UNESCO to carry out a diagnostic study in 2015. And Mr. C explained this study to us, as well as the following challenges. So firstly, a training workshop was established in May 2018 to ascertain which policy and strategy documents were needed by Mali, and also the need to promote upskilling and upgrading of teachers throughout their careers. And what's important in the workshop established to study their activities is finding contextual factors in order to adapt to the Malian context, teacher policy. And so the basis of this work was the document and strategies which have been developed in accordance with the international standards, including the IICBA guide, and studies conducted in the context of Project 2. And they set up a national technical team drawn from the Education Ministry and the Economy and Finance Ministry, as well as representatives of the social services, the teacher training colleges, as well as various ministerial departments, as well as partners such as the trade unions, the teachers' trade unions, as well as students' unions. And a documentary search was carried out through this process in a logical framework. And this study also led to the establishment of a budgetary framework and a strategic framework for a period of 5 years. So it's a multi-year plan budgeted for 5 years from 2021 to 2025. And the overall cost is amounts to $486 million. And there's a 20.8% gap to be filled. So this national technical team worked on 3 main areas with 9 dimensions. The first main area was professionalization of the teaching profession. Second was enhancing the role of teachers. And thirdly, rigorous, concentrated monitoring of teachers. So those lines of action were developed according to UNESCO, ICBA and TTF guides, and it made it possible to determine the budgetary framework. So I hope that has encapsulated in summary the presentation made by Mr. C in Mali. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, for that synthesis. I think it was very complete. I will not reiterate, but just would like to flag and to draw your attention to some of the issues that have been mentioned, many of which have to do with the financing needed, the growth of population and demand of schooling and education in the continent is large, and there is a shortage in terms of qualified teachers that needs to be addressed. And in terms of qualifications, there's a multiplicity of initiatives that have to do with new institutions, with new frameworks to frame continuous professional development, codes of conduct, social dialogue, and multiple partnerships with teacher unions, with teachers themselves as co-producers, as co-developers of and implementers of education policy. So we have taken account, and we will be, of course, reporting on the different highlights and takeaway lessons. But before we wrap up, I would like to pass the floor to 2 of our directors at UNESCO, Yumiko Yokoseki, the Director for the International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, and then to Mr. Bolencha Krun, who is the Director for the Division of Policy and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO. So Yumiko, please, if we could have your final remarks.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and thank you for this opportunity to say a few words. And congratulations to everyone for this very interactive and useful virtual workshop on teacher policy development in Africa. I think this must be the first time where we are in 3 languages, and the interaction and also learning from each other was immense. And this workshop is a result of a close collaboration between ICBA and Teacher Task Force, with major objectives to strengthen teacher policy development capacities in the continent and share the various resources, tools, and materials that UNESCO has been developing over the years. In particular, hands-on guides on teacher policy development by TTF and ICBA were the main topics. Now, these 2 resources are complementary to each other, as the TTF guide provides a generic global introduction to teacher policy development. ICBA's work complements its contextualization on the issue. I hope these guides will continue to be useful. Carlos has done a beautiful summary of these 3 presentations. It was very good to learn from each other. A couple of things I would like to stress. One thing is involvement of teachers in policy development. If the policy is for teachers, there is no way that we cannot hear the voices of teachers. So kudos to Uganda, who started a social dialogue with the teachers. And this is carried out in many countries. Another issue came in the discussion is contextualization, and also to build on what was done, and also to learn from each other. I believe that the way the workshop was structured with plenary and breakout sessions in 3 languages facilitate interaction and also learning from each other. In this regard, I want to express my sincere appreciation to our colleagues from Uganda, Mali, and Egypt for sharing their experiences on teacher policy development, and also other people for excellent interaction and very good interpretation. Thank you very much. As ICBA, we strongly believe that it works much better when we interact and learn from each other. Now, I would like to emphasize this virtual workshop is one in a series of similar capacity building workshops planned in the coming months. And we would be grateful if you could inform us about existing capacity development gaps and demands so that we can be more helpful in supporting you in future. I understand the next session is planned for September 2020, September in 2 months' time. So we look forward to your input and seeing you again. Let me end by saying a few words to thank everyone. I would not go through the names, but everyone in TTF-ICBA and also the countries. Thank you very much indeed, and see you again very soon. Back to you, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Yumiko, for your closing remarks. And let me pass the floor finally to Mr. Boren Chakurun, the Director of Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO. Please, Boren.
Thank you, Carlos, and good afternoon, good evening to all colleagues. I will try to honor the 3 languages that you have used today, and congratulations for this initiative, and echo what Director Yumiko was referring to as lessons learned, as knowledge sharing and platform for collaboration. I think what I've heard from the different session is really very rich in terms of the knowledge and the experiences that have been shared. Maybe a few points that I would like to highlight. The first one is that we have to frame the discussion on teachers in the context of the response to the COVID, but also as we are building back and thinking about resilience and reimagining education. And I think in this context, we shouldn't be shy about the important role that teachers are playing and will play going forward. I was listening to colleagues questioning a bit the impact of technology. I think that technology will be with us. They will impact the teaching profession as all the professions, but teachers is about our humanity. It's about social dialogue. It's about integration of in societies. So I think that bold message about the important role of teachers in the human interaction should be stated again and again.
Maybe the second point that I wanted to highlight, which I also think was very important, concerns the change that is demanded at the political level. We heard from different initiatives and we understood that the guides that have been used are very appropriate and important, but that each time these guides need to be contextualized and tailored to the national specificities, institutions, stakeholders. And I think that this message is a very important one. Any guide is only ever going to be effective if it's contextualized and adapted to the local specificities to ensure engagement at the local level. So I think, again, this is a very important point.
Maybe the third point that I would like to highlight is that policy learning should be the word here and the common ground. And policy learning will mean looking outward to enrich the national experience from international experience, and peer learning like exercise like the one we had today is very important. It's looking what different countries have been doing, but that at the end of the day, it's the national emphasis that has to prevail. And that the policy learning is also learning from the national experience and drawing on national experiences and looking at the past to build the future. So this is a dimension that I thought important. To finish, this initiative has been led by ICBA and the Teacher Task Force. Of course, we need actors that can advance capacity building, and ICBA is one of our important actors in this. But we need also knowledge sharing and knowledge platform that can bring together the resources, can make them available, accessible, and disseminated. And that's, for example, what the knowledge platform that has been established by the TTF was created for. So I would like to call on all the participants to look at the knowledge platform, enrich it with their own experience, with the experience of their countries, because that's our common good, and we would like to advance it. كارلوس والإخوة الأعزاء شكرا. هذه فرصة طيبة لأنه نتحدث بكل اللغات.
Thank you again very, very much. This has been the perfect opportunity to discuss in all of these languages, and UNESCO is a multilingual institution. So it's always a pleasure to catch up with you. A big thank you to all of our participants and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Warren. Merci et shukran. Thank you. I just wanted to make a small comment before closing and thanking you all again. There are certificates available for this workshop. In the chat, you will see an email address where you can send your name and contact details for these certificates to be made available. And just with that, I would like to close by saying we're very grateful for all of your participation, for all of the insights. We leave this workshop with a lot of ideas as to how to further develop our tools, our policy development guides, and our assistance to member states. As Yumiko was mentioning before, and from UNESCO, we also encourage the participation of all stakeholders in policy development processes, and we stand ready to support your processes, whether it is in revamping, in renewing, or in establishing a national teachers policy. So I hope the resources that have been shared will be useful in that respect. We have taken note of what are some of the main elements that need further development, and we will be producing further guidance to accompany you in these policy development processes. As Boren said, also very happy to learn from national experiences as the ones that have been shared today. So with that, we appreciate again and thank you for your participation. Have a good afternoon, have a good evening, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Merci, au revoir.
Bye-bye.
Merci, au revoir.
Thank you.
Merci, au revoir.
Merci, au revoir.
Bye bye, everybody from Ghana.
Merci, au revoir.
Aiko Ghana.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Aiko.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you very much from North Macedonia. Thank you so much.
From Ghana.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Mohammed Alawi, shukran, Alawi.
Thank you very much for the participation from Liberia.
Thank you. Hi, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you from Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for the.
Je vais mettre Men.
Zimbabwe, Maita Basa.
Yes.
Dino tenda.
You are welcome. The tender.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Non, ça y est, c'est pas la peine. Ah, Michel.
Just fine. Bye bye, you. This is your friend in Ghana.
Bye bye from Zambia, Christopher.
Everybody's.